the sequence of events as it's unfolding is, I feel as if I'm always looking at something too close up, and that there's over and over again I have to pull further and further back in search of some kind of bigger picture. And at the same time, I think it's very obviously over the weeks and months and years we've contemplated specifics in relation to the changing world as it's been unfolding in the past 3 years. We've looked at various aspects of that, and to me, more and more I find myself contemplating humanity and what it is to be human. Increasingly what I feel is being lost is just sight of the individual human being and what a human being actually is. Elsewhere this week I was reminded of and reading again about and thinking again about the Valladolid debate that took place in the Spanish city of Valladolid in the August of 1550 and then again the following year, and it was prompted by a realisation even then that what had been happening in the Spanish colonies in the Americas was wrong. That while some narrow group was becoming fabulously wealthy and gold and silver were flowing, sugar and all the rest of it, that the native population were being crucified, really, not literally, but they were being, the heart was being ripped out of them and people were dying in vast numbers. So as early as the turn of the 16th century, people knew it was wrong. Some people knew it was wrong and started speaking up about it. And by the middle of that century, finally Charles I of Spain, Holy Roman Emperor, summoned called for this debate, a junta, in a great hall in Valladolid, where they came together to consider basically what it is to be human, which I find that astonishing, or it never ceases to amaze me how even half a millennium ago people were thinking what we think is our stuff, human rights, but people paused to think about that in the middle years of this 16th century. I would say that now, as then, it comes down to times when a narrow group consider themselves to be superior to everybody else. And that's fundamentally what troubles me now. I think so much of what's happening now is driven by an assumption that a narrow group of ultra-wealthy technocrats have decided that they are superior. And I would go so far as to say that we're living through a time of self-proclaimed gods. I think the ultra-rich, and through those whom through their wealth have acquired power and influence, they want what gods always want, which is sacrifice and worship. Sacrifice and worship. It's the same old story. And in our 21st century iteration of the world, the necessary sacrifice, as it turns out, well, it's a bundle made of our freedoms and rights. That's what's to be sacrificed. We have to offer that up to the gods. And the necessary worship is dependence. These new gods, these self-proclaimed deities, demonstrably want the mass of the population to need them and to depend on them for all the necessities of life. It's the oldest story. It's like the pantheon of Greek gods as they were understood by the Greeks. They wanted to be needed. They demanded to be needed, and they lived in terror of people not needing them. And here we are in the 21st century contemplating the same. And the consequence is that our independence, individually and collectively, is to be discouraged and, well, stamped upon, quite frankly. And that's why I say, now, agree with me, disagree with me if you feel, but I say that there's a war being waged on the middling classes. And I say middling rather than middle because I think a lot of the traditional divisions of society are kind of breaking down. But back through history, there's always been a middling class. Those that, by their own efforts, or maybe with a bit of luck involved as well, they find ways to be independent of the state. And in our time, it's people that set up their own businesses, self-employed people who become their own employers, and so that they step away from the sort of pay-as-you-earn, PAYE, being answerable to the man, step away from it as much as they can, and they pursue happiness by not having to ask for or need help from anybody else, and they seek to make successful lives free of anybody's interference. And as always happens, they finally come up against the new gods, and our new gods are anti-human and pro-machine. They're pro the machines that they have the technology to make, and they've persuaded themselves that at the same time that humanity, that the human being Mark I is suboptimal, not up to the job of existing in the 21st century, and they've persuaded themselves that we've to be upgraded via merging with the technology for which they hold the patents and the copyright and the trademarks. And I would say that as happened, as was recognised in the 16th century in the debate at Valladolid, and is evident again now, all of it comes from failure to conceive of what it even is to be human. Failure to accept that all humans are human, and that we are all entitled to the same freedoms and rights and aspirations. It's one of the great failings of our species that periodically some of us persuade themselves, that there's a few worth saving and a great mass that might as well be drowned, figuratively speaking. And it amazes me, because even now in the 21st century, even the brightest minds are doing no more than scratch the surface of answering the question of what we are capable of. When it comes to human consciousness, we don't have a clue. We don't have a clue where human consciousness comes from and what it's capable of, what it means to be conscious. And then something like the human immune system, we are nowhere near understanding the immune system. If the immune system is the Pacific Ocean, then even the brightest scientists are just bobbing about on the surface of it in dugout canoes, with no way of estimating the depth and coming to terms with what might be going on all around them and beneath them in that vastness. Neither do we understand yet, even having decoded the human genome, we don't properly appreciate the ability of the human to adapt. How that's possible. You know, when your body takes in a toxin, if you accidentally take in something poisonous, when it reaches your liver can repurpose its own cells to come to terms with what the toxin is and deal with it, even as it's encountering it for the first time. A completely novel toxin. Your liver can as though it's got a Swiss Army knife, and there's another wee tool in there that we've never had that one out before, and it can take out that little tool and repurpose itself to deal with that poison. And then when the poison's dealt with, that all unhappens, and those cells that were briefly marshalled as an army to deal with the problem go back to being what they were. It's astonishing, and that's just the liver. You know, that ability of the human creature, the human creation, it's beyond us yet. But nonetheless, there's a group of technologists out there who think that it's not good enough, and that they can tweak it with circuit boards and wiring. And where we are now is just a repeat of where we've been before. You know, Aristotle, amongst that pantheon, that triptych of Greek philosophers, you know, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. But Aristotle believed that the majority of human beings were just up for enslavement. They were slaves by nature. You know, that it was no injustice to enslave the vast majority of the population, because that was what they were for. That was Aristotle. That was his thinking. Aristotle, who's credited with so much wisdom and so much rational thinking, Aristotle regarded reason as being distinctive, unique to human beings. But at the same time, he was able to state that natural slaves were human. And he said, a natural slave shares in reason to the extent of understanding it, but does not have it in himself. So his thinking was that, yeah, the sort of people that you can happily make slaves, without questioning your morality, they know what reason is. They can spot it, but they don't have it. Which was a fairly slippery bit of thinking. And so you get to what I mentioned, that debate in Valladolid in 1550, and the humanist scholar Juan de Sepulveda and the Dominican friar Bartolomé de las Casas argued the toss. Sepulveda was of the opinion that Aristotle was right, that most people were born to be slaves. And it came down to Bartolomé to say, no, these are rational human beings who deserve to be treated as rational human beings. But here we are again, and with a narrow group determined that the mass of us can have our rights set aside because we might as well be enslaved. And again, the motive is profit. It was gold and silver out of the Americas in the 16th century, and now it's the great wealth that presents itself in the 21st century. For those who've been able to put their hands on the levers of power. And in so doing, the well-being of the individual is being set aside. The freedom of the individual is being set aside, as though we don't matter. The rights of individuals, human beings, are being deleted, literally deleted, from the amended version of the World Health Organization's Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. The words relating to human rights, the individual, are being deleted. And it's being replaced with some vague notion of equality or equity. And so implicit in that is the notion that when it gets right down to it, human rights don't matter. And that in pursuit of something greater, whatever that might be, you can set them aside. Digital ID and central bank digital currencies, which are coming down the line at us, are digital enslavement. And they are backed up, aided and abetted by round-the-clock surveillance and social credit scores and all of the rest of it. We are looking once again at a narrow group deciding that most of us can and should be enslaved. That's what we're looking at. And it didn't start in the 16th century with the Spanish feeling they could enslave people, and it didn't start with Aristotle in ancient Greece rationalising that it was perfectly okay to enslave people. It's in the nature of the human animal, the incredible human animal that we don't yet understand, and the human consciousness that we don't yet understand has that dark twin, that dark travelling companion, always there. So, watch as we go through it all again. And just as a Holy Roman Emperor in the 16th century saw fit to have a debate, we need another one now. We need another debate now. For our own sake, we need to come together and consider what it means to be human and alive.